I was surprised, I should say, first off, that an FIR had been filed. But I spoke to quite a few people and in the Navy, and they said this is standard operating procedure.
Right.
When an accident happens involving civilians, and these fishermen were civilians, an FIR is always filed. And in this case, tragically, two fishermen lost their lives, and therefore an FIR is mandatory. It has to be filed because it becomes a civil case. I read the FIR, and it's a scary document. As we know from the tragedy, it was too late, and the boat rammed right into the submarine's fin, broke right in two, and very rapidly sank. For God's sake, you're an advanced submarine. With sensors, with sonar, with radar, with, all kinds of sensors and detection devices. You're a piece of military equipment, and you couldn't dodge a little fishing boat. How are you going to fight a war? The Navy is usually pretty merciless with its own. Military is usually merciless with its own. When something like this happens, because I'm sure they did everything they possibly could to get out of it. But there will be questions asked about, why they didn't act in time. Were there other protocols that could have been carried out before they did it? Was there a failure, as far as the lookout was concerned? Should they have been more wary than the fishing boat, which didn't have advanced equipment on board? These are the obvious questions that the public will ask, and I'm sure they'll come up in the Board of Inquiry as well. Now, since military ships are literally instruments of war, they don't have general insurance, okay, because they literally go into harm's way, carrying enormous amounts of fuel and weapons and bombs and explosives, etc. So no general insurance company is going to say, yes, okay, fine, please pay this premium and we will insure your submarine.
Hello and welcome to the 49th episode of In Our Defense. Hi Shiv, how are you?
Good, Dev. Treading outside the Maharashtra Tamasha, which is finally over now, so that's
Finally
behind
over,
us,
finally over.
and we can focus on some really good things in the news now. 11 days of uncertainty finally over.
Yeah, finally over. I mean, there's still some left actually of what will happen
By the time
tomorrow.
this episode goes on, hopefully it'll all be over now.
Right. But this week we'll talk about something that happened off the coast of Maharashtra actually. A collision that involved an Indian Navy submarine. But before we do that, just a shout out to Indian Navy, because we record this on Navy Day, December 4. And I think when the episode will be out by Friday, it'll be a week basically when Navy has been celebrating its many achievements and its service to the nation. I thought when I thought on Monday किस बार क्या discuss करेंगे, I thought we should do probably a sort of an episode on Navy and how it sort of really come into its own over the last few years or maybe one decade in terms of getting that sort of prime attention from the government. But then I thought that we've already kind of discussed that over several episodes, whether we an episode about the submarines, the nuclear attack submarines, or about the aircraft carrier INS Vikrant. So I think we'll just have those links in the show notes. But I do feel that, and especially this is like sort of a personal sort of a revelation for me with the many chats that we've had over the 49 odd episodes of In Our Defense in season 2. I've kind of realized that Navy really has sort of got that prime focus from the government. Your thoughts before we begin this episode?
So I think you're right. It's a little ironic that on Navy Day, which is today, the day that we're recording this episode, we're doing an episode. The topic we've chosen is not a very pleasant topic. We're going to be talking about collisions at sea, and there was an accident recently as well. In fact, just before we began this recording, Dave, I was speaking to a Navy friend of mine to get some understanding of some of the finer points which I'm going to be talking about collisions, and he was saying, on Navy Day you're doing an episode on collisions. Is that fair? And I was talking to him about it, and I said, you've seen our podcast. We cover all aspects of the Navy. We've done amazing in-depth episodes about all aspects of the Navy. Most of it very, very positive, and not because we're doing PR for the Navy, but because the Navy deserves a great deal of applause. And let's use this day, Navy Day, to applaud and the smallest of our armed forces, which in many ways ought to be the biggest, considering the huge maritime responsibilities that India has. a navy that has been able to be a global force, a friend to other countries, and a sort of source of stability for years and years with very, very limited resources, and has been able to do it in an amazingly reliable and professional way. So this is, Dev and me wishing all Navy personnel, veterans, their families, their units, people out at sea, men, women, the very best on Navy Day. And I think they will understand that we've chosen this topic because it's a national topic. It's a topic that is of importance. It also relates to the safety of naval personnel and naval assets, and therefore why not Navy Day? So I was able to convince my friend in the Navy that today is actually a perfect day to discuss something like this, because it actually pertains to safety protocols, etc., which is something that needs to be looked at, and therefore and plus, Dave, as we were discussing before this, we have a live example of an accident of this kind happening off India's west coast.
Yeah. And especially because we want to use this episode sort of to get into the mechanics, the physics, the anatomy of how a collision at sea happens. Yeah. Because, when Shiv, you messaged in the group the other day that this is a topic we should cover, I immediately thought, oh yes, because, you can't brake at sea. So what happens? How does it all happen when a collision happens? What happens after that? Yeah. What leads to one? Is something that we'll cover on this episode, and collisions at sea they just get headlines, right? You've had the recent example in the US where a cargo ship smashed into the Baltimore Bridge, killing around 7 people. It was quite the spectacle in the visuals sort of a way, not in the positive word sort of a way. You of course have the grand example of Titanic, the unsinkable ship, so to speak, that killed over I think around 1,500 people. And speaking of navies, while I was doing some background for this episode, I think in 2017 the US Navy faced 2 very bad collisions where around 20 people were killed.
The USS Fitzgerald
and the USS John McCain, John S. McCain, and that actually led to sackings and removal from posts of several top US Navy officers. So I think that is sort of what we'll kind of focus on, of what really happens when a collision happens and how do you assign and even assign responsibility that, okay, that was what went wrong. But before we do that, let's talk about what happened a few days ago. INS Karanj, a Cavalry class submarine, hit a fishing boat off the coast of, I think, Mumbai, if I'm not wrong.
Off the coast of Goa.
Off the coast of Goa, sorry, near Maharashtra. I think it was at periscope depth is what the initial report said. And the Navy has filed an FIR against the fishing boat's captain. 2 lives, I think, sadly were lost. The submarine, I think they tried to rescue the fishermen and 2 could not be found and they've been, I think, presumed dead. Might seem odd to people that why would the Navy go around filing an FIR? And it's a submarine. How is the fishing boat at to blame, even if it's a periscope depth? So before we get into the physics, anatomy, like I said, tell us what we know about this incident and what exactly happened over here.
So this was the 21st of November, Dev. It was late in the evening. It was a little after 9 p.m. And 9 p.m., 70 nautical miles off the coast of Goa is pitch dark. It's completely dark, and therefore, visibility is not something you can rely on. And INS Karanj, which is a fairly new submarine, it was commissioned just in 2021, so that makes it practically brand new almost. Was at periscope depth. Periscope depth is basically just the fin of the submarine with the periscope and the the other masts and the sensors and the pipes through which they suck in oxygen, etc. Only those are sticking out of the water. When you picture a submarine, you usually see the silhouette of the submarine plus that vertical fin with the periscope, etc. So periscope depth is basically the rest of the submarine is submerged and just that vertical fin with the periscopes are up there. And when a submarine is at periscope depth, as I understand it in this particular case, the submarine was basically recharging its batteries. It's a diesel-electric submarine, which means it needs to periodically come up to periscope depth in order to suck in oxygen to recharge its batteries and get its diesel motors running. It was completely dark. I was surprised, I should say, first off, that an FIR had been filed. But I spoke to quite a few people and in the Navy, Dave, and they said this is standard operating procedure. Right. When an accident happens involving civilians, and these fishermen were civilians, an FIR is always filed. And in this case, tragically, two fishermen lost their lives, and therefore an FIR is mandatory. It has to be filed because it becomes a civil case. I read the FIR, and it's a scary document because it's written in the words of the executive officer of the submarine. The executive officer is basically the number 2 man on board, the man right under the commanding officer. And the submarine was at periscope depth, like I said, and it was moving at about 6 knots, pretty slow. Just nice and easy, getting its oxygen, cruising very, very slowly and recharging its batteries. When the submarine lookout officer, whoever was on the lookout, noticed this fishing boat at a distance of about 2 to 3 kilometers on its port bow. So that's basically, if the submarine is like this, forward and to the right, about 2 to 3 kilometers. And the boat appeared to be stationary. And it was very dimly lit, apparently. So it was barely visible, and it was dimly lit. So they couldn't get an exact bearing of where exactly the boat was or what it was trying to do, or whether the boat had seen them, etc. None of that was available. As the submarine attempted to move away, decided to change course and move away. Before it could do that, the sonar of the submarine detected the boat changing direction and moving towards the submarine at speed.
Okay.
And it wasn't clear why they would do this. And the submarine mast apparently did have some warning lights in order to warn anyone who's coming near. They have the ability to turn a light on, if a situation like this occurs. And that didn't stop the boat. The boat apparently kept coming, and the submarine, the team controlling the submarine attempted to increase speed. Remember, it's not possible to make sudden moves in a submarine when you're at periscope depth. It's not like you can suddenly dive. There are many hatches you need to close, many things that need to be done before you can dive. So it's not like you can make very, very abrupt, evasive maneuvers in a submarine. And therefore, the only course of action that they could take is to try and very quickly change direction and speed up a little bit. But as we know from the tragedy, it was too late. And the boat rammed right into the submarine's fin, broke right in two, and very rapidly sank. Men from the submarine jumped into the sea to rescue some of the fishermen. Some of the fishermen swam to another fishing boat, which was apparently a little distance away. And in total, about 11 people were rescued. Another Navy vessel also turned up and attempted to rescue some of the people. And by the morning, it was clear that 2 people were missing, and 2 bodies were also fished out of the sea. The submarine had clearly sustained some damage to its fin and to its hull. There is some damage because this was a fairly large fishing trawler. Not very large, but it's not a small little boat, just so our viewers and listeners understand. So there was quite a bit of damage to the tiling and and the equipment, etc., and the periscope, etc., probably has been damaged. So the submarine went back to its base in Karwar, in Karnataka, and it was assessed that there's about 10 crore rupees in damage. And 10 crore rupees is a fortune. I mean, it's nothing compared to the cost of a submarine, but 10 crore rupees of public money for a national security asset is an unforgivable price to pay, if negligence has happened. Well, anyway, we'll have to wait for the board of inquiry to figure out what happened. But I can tell you that the Navy is usually pretty merciless with its own. The military is usually merciless with its own. When something like this happens, because the obvious questions that will be asked, and I don't want to second guess what the inquiry is going to do and what kind of action will be taken against the crew of the submarine, because it can be nobody's case that they wanted this to happen. I'm sure they did everything they possibly could to get out of it, but there will be questions asked about why they didn't act in time. Were there other protocols that could have been carried out before they did it? Was there a failure, as far as the lookout was concerned? Should they have been more wary than the fishing boat, which didn't have advanced equipment on board? These are the obvious questions that the public will ask, and I'm sure they'll come up in the board of inquiry as well. But net, it was an absolutely awful accident. If all the fishermen had survived, we could still sort of wring our hands and talk about this accident in a different kind of light. But two humans have died. One was 24 years old. One was 30 years old. One from Kerala, as I understand it, and one from Odisha. Young boys in the prime of their lives working on a fishing boat. So obviously our deepest condolences to their families. But the inquiry will have to go into what happened, because the other obvious question is going to be, a lay person will probably ask, for God's sake, you're an advanced submarine, with sensors, with sonar, with radar, with all kinds of sensors and detection devices. You're a piece of military equipment, and you couldn't dodge a little fishing boat. How are you going to fight a war? That's that's not how I feel, but I'm saying that's the public consuming that news headline will probably say that. And if you look at the social media chatter around this, it is like, oh my God, you guys can't even sail a submarine safely, off the coast of Goa, the safest place to sail a submarine. Those are the obvious questions that are going to be asked. But as we go through this episode, we will obviously throw light on how collisions are much more complicated than that.
Yeah. And collisions, in fact, are much more common than you would imagine.
Oh, yeah.
I was quite surprised because when I was just look at a Wikipedia list, forget doing proper research, it is endless.
Yeah.
And that actually went, for me, it begged the question, wait, this sounds like sea travel is like much more dangerous than any form of travel in the world if this is the amount of collisions that happen. Because the collisions that make headlines are usually the ones like these, which involve, like, let's say, a submarine or where people sadly lose their lives. So then, yes, to understand why collisions happen, I think first we need to understand how vastly different it is to navigate oceans and seas compared to land, or even air for that matter, by the way, with the kind of airplanes that we have, and the way they are almost sort of interconnected and interlinked with the help of various satellite systems and with the help of humans in terms of air traffic control, etc., and very, very strict rules in terms of what sort of lane in the air they'll be able to fly, etc. It is not quite like that at the sea. You can't be like, tere ko yehi line chalna hai, because a wave might come and push you somewhere else altogether, right? And like I said at the beginning of this episode, you can't brake at sea. I mean, technically, in the way people would imagine braking in the real world. Like, you see something come in front of you, oh, hey, brake. Or like, hey, steering left, and you go there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Shiv, tell us, how do ships, submarines, they navigate out at sea? I don't know if you've seen this movie called Greyhound. It's on Apple TV, if I'm not wrong, starring Denzel Washington. It's from the World War II, when there's a military escort of US Navy ships escorting civilian ships across the channel towards Europe. And this, though it's a war movie, it shows a lot of fighting and tracking submarines and warships fighting amongst each other, etc. I quite liked how they showed how they kind of go about navigating and identifying objects and trying to go towards that. So that's sort of a visual reference to our readers. But what I want from you is sort of this theoretical sort of lesson that you would give to somebody who's going to go out on a boat with maybe the steering at his hand. Like, the kind of guide you would tell him कि भाई तुमको ये सब चीजें ध्यान रखना है, ऐसे तुमको चलाना है. How would you describe it? So
the amazing thing about navigation is the history of humanity is basically the history of navigation. Since the dawn of the modern age as we understand it through civilization, navigation, being able to traverse the vast oceans and get from one place to another in the spirit of discovery or conquest, as it became later, is basically the history of humanity. So navigation is ingrained in our history, and it's a very important part of it. I second your emotions when you're surprised about that huge Wikipedia list that still shows how many collisions take place. But the thing is, if you actually, and we will now get into the technicals of navigation and why collisions take place, it becomes easier to understand that it's actually not so surprising that list is big. First of all, like you very importantly and rightly said, Dave, unlike air travel, where flight paths and flight plans are meticulous and detailed, and there is very, very little room for deviation. And even the smallest of deviations on the longest haul flights need to be notified, need to be cleared, need to be approved by ground control, in at least 2 places before they can happen. A passenger plane cannot typically change even its altitude without getting clearance from ground control. All of these make air travel extremely constricted in terms of what they can do. They're basically like cable cars. There's very little steering you can actually do in an aircraft. Anything you want to do has to be cleared. The ocean is like an enormous, like sort of gargantuan playground where there are no traffic signals. There are no signboards saying left or right. There are no stop signs. There are no slow signs. There are no markers on the road telling you where you need to go. There most definitely is no ground control telling you where you need to go. The beauty and the terrifying aspect of ocean navigation by ships is that you are everything to yourself. Your ship is completely self-contained. There's nobody on shore telling you where you need to go, whether you're cleared to go in a certain direction, etc. Everything is happening at sea, on your ship, or through other ships. That's it. So the incredible thing about navigation is that collisions are entirely contained in the actions of ships themselves. They can't be the errors of somebody else, someone on shore. If you take air-to-air collisions, they can most certainly happen because of pilot error, etc. But they can almost always happen because of ground control error. People giving the wrong message, a guy at the radar control, failing to relay a message, reading altitudes wrong, language barriers like in the Charkhi Dadri crash, which continues to be the biggest, air-to-air collision which happened just outside Delhi. But at sea, ships are very much isolated and on their own. And you need to look out for themselves. Now, very quickly, there are 2 or 3 things that govern how ships can collide, and the reason why ships can collide is because we are tempted to think of the ocean as this huge, massive, place for ships to sail, and therefore, how can ships collide? There's so much space. I'm sure they can see each other from like a long distance away. So what's the big deal? What we tend to forget, and this is contrary to what I said initially, is even though you've got all that space, there are shipping lanes. It's not like the entire sea is there for anyone to sail. Theoretically, you can if you want to, but ships go from one place to the other. Unless you're on a cruise, in which case you're not really in a hurry to get anywhere and you can sail anywhere you want. Warships, merchant ships, fishing vessels are typically constrained by a mission. They need to get from one place to another, which means they're confined to certain shipping channels, shipping lanes, etc., and can't really stray. And therefore, when you've got shipping lanes, it means that more ships are confined to a certain confined space. And when I say confined space, I don't mean this terribly small channel, but a limited amount of ocean. But the more you limit the ocean, the less space those ships have in terms of free sailing, etc. There are 2 or 3 conventions that govern. Navigation is a simple concept. It's the ability to steer your ship from one place to another, keeping it safe, etc. Using technology, using compasses, whatever you want, as it has changed over the years. But given that collisions have been commonplace for literally all of humanity, they've happened for the longest time. There's a possibly there's a possibly incorrect quote that is attributed to a Greek philosopher from 4,000 years ago who talks about how, a ship collision can spoil your day. I very much doubt a Greek philosopher said that, but it is dated back to that time, which shows that collisions have been happening since thousands of years ago, in our nautical traditions. But the fact that collisions happen even now, starting from, let's just consider the period from World War II onwards. 1945, there have been so many collisions. Immediately after the World War, US warships have collided dramatically into each other. The 2017 collision that you were talking about was between a US Navy cruiser and a massive merchant ship, which collided just off the coast of Japan, if I'm not mistaken. These are ships which are advanced, have trained crews, have technology, have satcoms, have radars, have sonars, whatever. They've got everything they need to, and they still collide. Which means that an entire cocktail of things have to have gone wrong for ships to collide. Like you said, ships don't have brakes like a car does. Ships tend to take a long time to turn, brake, reverse, etc. There are 2 or 3 conventions that ships are supposed to follow, basic conventions when they're out at sea. There's one of them which is called the rules of the road, the ocean's rules of the road, which are usually very simple things. Like, for example, none of these are complicated. There are more technical aspects of collision avoidance which are related to technology, which I'll get to as well. But I'll just name 3 small rules so our viewers understand that there are some basic sort of almost sort of cardinal rules of collision avoidance. One is if 2 ships are headed towards each other, like bow on bow, the bow is the front of the ship, bow on bow, then the standard operating procedure is for both ships to turn to their starboard. Starboard is the right side. So they're both supposed to turn to the right. And that's a rule that is ingrained in all sailors, that if you're heading dead on with another ship, turn right. Okay, so there will not be a doubt in any of the... If the guy in front of you turns left and you turn right, you're going to be colliding like this.
Yeah.
Right? So both of you know you're supposed to turn right, so you're basically turning away from each other. So that's one safety protocol for if you're heading towards each other. Second, if one ship is trying to overtake another ship, the ship that is being overtaken has to maintain its speed, maintain its course, maintain its direction, and cannot change any part of its configuration until it is overtaken. So the entire onus on not colliding is on the overtaking ship. That's another. Then there are very frequently T collisions where one ship will go ram into another ship like that, like what happened with this submarine and the fishing boat. In that case, and this is also a very, very clear rule, that when you've got a ship going like this and a ship coming like this, the ship that's the head of the T, the one that has the one heading it to, is supposed to stop. It's supposed to slow down and let this ship pass first, and only then go. So there are all these manners of rules that are there. There are conventions and regulations called call regs, which dictate many other aspects, which are the kind of lighting systems you need to have. There is something called an automatic identification system, which even fishing boats and fishing trawlers are supposed to have. Anything above 300 tons is supposed to have something called an automatic identification system, which is basically a high frequency radio emitter, which will sort of beep and provide a blip on a radar map that a warship can have, so they can avoid fishing boats and fishing trawlers. In this particular case, this boat was too small to have one of those. So it needed to be all visual. When you're going completely visual, things like this can still happen. Now, there may be questions that will be asked about, why did the submarine only spot the boat until it was too late? Did the submarine not have domain awareness? I mean, for God's sake, it's a submarine. You're literally supposed to know what's happening several kilometers around you. You've got the sensors to do that. So how did you miss a fishing boat? All those questions can be asked. But most experts, most maritime legal experts, because whenever collisions take place, they usually become huge legal cases as well. Merchant vessels versus warships, etc. Even this could become a legal case because that fishing boat will be owned by someone. That boat is gone. It might become a tussle between the Navy and them, which is why this FIR has been filed. But most experts say that there are many ways that you can avoid collisions, and if all of those protocols are followed very, very strictly, then collisions usually do not happen. The reason why collisions do happen is because crew fatigue, someone was slacking off on the job, the lookout. When you say the lookout on a ship, it can be human and technological, but the main human lookout is a person who is fully alert, not fatigued, not tired. They have shifts, obviously, on ships to keep a complete 360-degree view of what's around the ship to make sure that nothing is coming close to it. Because it may not even be a collision. It can be a terror thing also. It can be a terrorist attack like the USS Cole. What happened with the USS Cole? You have to have complete lookout. It can be someone who was not paying attention. It can be someone who was ill and decided to take some shortcuts. It can be what happened with the Titanic. It can be weather. It can be a malfunctioning of technology where sensors are not working and you're completely flying blind. It can be that you've done everything correct. Your lookout is fine, your technology is fine, but the other ship has not followed protocol, has not had a lighting system, is not beeping on its automatic identification system. Their crew is asleep, their crew is sick, whatever it is. And until it's too late, you have no idea that the ship is there. And like you said, you can't brake. It's very, very difficult. Ships have something called a tactical diameter, Dev. It's a small technical term, which is the minimum radius that's required for a ship to take a 180-degree turn. Now, that gives you a bit of an idea of how long it's going to take for you to evade. Obviously, the bigger the ship, the larger the tactical radius, tactical diameter. But even the INS Karanj, the submarine that we're talking about, is not a very large beast. It's not at all large. It's a pretty small, pretty compact submarine. But even that couldn't move away in time from a little fishing trawler. It just tells you how difficult things are at sea. And nobody wants collisions because collisions are career-ending deals. I hope that there's an explanation for what happened, but I can tell you that any collision is a deep professional embarrassment, no matter who is to blame. No matter who is to blame. Since we're talking about INS Karanj, the submarine thing, I'm not going to second guess what happens in the board of inquiry. I'm not going to second guess whether there's going to be a court martial or whatever. I never wish for these things because I know how dangerous sailing is and how difficult and complicated it is. But at the end of the day, if a collision happens on your watch, the record shows that the Navy is usually has no mercy. Because ultimately the buck stops with you. The buck stops with the commanding officer. How did this happen on your watch? How did things reach a point where you could not turn around and avoid this accident? All these difficult questions will come in, and it all comes down to how collisions can be avoided.
Yeah. In fact, I think that's exactly what happened in 2017 with the US Navy. Because if you look at the litany of officers who were either sacked or, sent somewhere else, it's a very, very long list. And it's not even limited to the officers who were present on those two ships, USS Fitzgerald and USS John S. McCain. It's also the commanding officers of the fleet. It was a sort of a wide range
and in the case of the USS Fitzgerald, just to show you how ruthless militaries can be in this kind of thing, even though the commanding officer and certain other crew members were dismissed from service, unceremoniously dismissed from service, it was the merchant vessel that paid the US Navy $27 million, which basically meant that at the end of the investigation, the merchant vessel was at fault. But the military doesn't see it that way. They still see it as, why did you, under your watch, how did this even happen? How did things come to a point where your ship could touch another ship? That's how the Navy sees it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, right. We'll talk now a bit about what happens in the aftermath of such collisions, the immediate aftermath, and obviously maybe a few months later when, like you said, the investigations happen, but after a quick break.
Bangladesh's state religion is Islam, But the Awami League government only
calls it a secular country.
Yeah, it reintroduced secularism, right?
Retract secularism. And you needn't. So Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's contribution to the liberation of Bangladesh is well known.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to be called father of the nation. That goes against the grain of the constitution itself.
Right.
So these are the two demands. For
So you
everyone
said-
who says that it is a very good word, what will you tell your children? That secularism is a bad word.
That's what, like, it's...
How do you
has-
tell the future generations what secularism is?
Yeah.
Secularism has only two meanings: either not recognizing religion as part of state at all, or recognizing all religions as equal. There is
Right.
no other. But even if you're recognizing it, recognize all as equal. And that's the only way it works. Not saying that secularism means appeasement, secularism. Everything else is what people have done with religions. Minority appeasement, majoritarian politics, so on and so forth. That does not take away from what secularism means and is. So to take that word away would really mean...
No,
and then now they're criticizing Bangladesh for it because
Yeah.
they're... The majority
It's
are Muslim.
are Muslims. The legal officials over there are like hell-bent कि you remove this word.
There is one thing for it to be criminal, for an act to be a crime. There's another thing for an act to be anti-constitutional or against the constitution, because then your act is graver.
Yeah.
So when something happens over here and we say, oh, it runs against the grain of the constitution.
Welcome back. Shiv and I are discussing collisions at sea and how inherently difficult they are to avoid. Shiv kind of gave us a broad picture of, how there are protocols in place that are meant to help sailors, whether they are merchant or from the military, to help avoid collisions at sea. But, because of various factors that Shiv just listed before the break, things can go wrong at sea, and collisions do happen. And when it comes to militaries, more often than not, the officers on board that particular ship are usually acted against because, like Shiv said, how could this happen under your watch? I guess that also kind of goes back to the earlier point that you made, that unlike with, let's say, an accident on road or an accident in air or involving airplanes, there's only two things that have gone wrong, and both those things or either of those things are on those two ships that were involved in the collision. It's not some other external factor that was involved. Right. Let's now talk about what happens in the immediate aftermath of the collision, and then we'll talk about what happens much later. Let's take the example of the Indian Navy submarine INS Karanj that was involved in a collision with the fishing boat. What sort of damage control happens on board a ship, a Navy ship, or a naval submarine? What's the first thing that the captain or the XO, executive officer, like you said, would do to kind of, first check the sort of, कि सब कुछ सही है कि नहीं है? Thanks to Titanic, I think everybody knows the concept of compartments on ships. And, whenever you, many of these war films involving naval ships, there's always this one scene where the commanding officer has to take that call of shutting down this one hatch, leaving some men behind inside it, because it's a question of saving the boat versus saving those men in that compartment. Because once that compartment is shut, to prevent water from filling in more, it's shut forever. So take us through what's the damage control like when a collision happens, minor, major, whatever it is. What's the immediate protocol, and what's the immediate thing that happens on board a ship when something like this happens?
So, since we're talking about this specific submarine, INS Karanj, which is a Scorpion class submarine, it's a fairly modern submarine, thankfully, and therefore it has something called a structural health monitoring system, which means that if there are any breaches, any fractures to the hull, any kind of compromise to the structural integrity of the submarine, the commanding officer and the crew will know about it, because it'll flash on consoles, etc., and they will know immediately where the problem is and what has happened. So this is a fairly a modern amenity on submarines, so that they don't need to look for where the problem is. These things are there. In earlier World War II type submarines, they'd have all kinds of pumps and pipes and things like that. Now it's much more modern, even though the technology is largely the same. Now it's much more electronic, etc. So obviously the first priority number one for the crew is to make sure that the submarine is safe, because if the submarine is not safe, then they can't even get out and see if the fishing boat is okay. So once they confirm that the submarine is structurally okay, not taking water in because a collision can very easily open a hole, or open a gash on the side of a submarine or a top of a submarine. And in this particular case, the submarine was like that, and the boat just went over its front, over its bow, broke in two, and then sank in two pieces, basically like that. So in this particular case, once the crew had ensured that the submarine was structurally okay, not sinking uncontrollably, not taking in water, etc. Obviously the engines would have been it would have been made stationary. I don't know if the engines would be turned off, but it would be brought to a stop. All systems would be very, very quickly checked. There would be a checklist to make sure that all other systems of the submarine are okay and it's handling fine. Once that happened, remember that the crew would already know by now what has happened, because they've been tracking this fishing boat, trying to get out of the way, trying to speed up, and literally through the periscope watched this damn thing coming right at them and smashing into them. So it's not like they are in the dark and wondering, hey, what was that sound? It's not like that. They would know exactly what happened, right? And plus their sonar would have been giving them the full picture as well. Once they've confirmed that the submarine itself is safe and stable, etc., a team would climb the ladder up the fin, get out of the submarine to get that first visual look with human eyes, what has happened. And apparently the first scene they must have seen, I'm assuming, is a large oil slick, because this was a fishing boat. It was a diesel-powered fishing boat. So there was a huge amount of diesel spillage. And there was damage to the fin of the submarine, as well as the front part of the submarine. There was some damage to it. Submarines are basically covered by, tiles, anechoic tiles, which makes them, suppresses sound, etc. Makes them more stealthy. So there was damage to the outer layer of the submarine, not the metallic part, but the outer layer, and some damage to the fin and the periscope area. Immediately, some of the crew, the commanding officer ordered some of the crew to get into the water and rescue some of those fishermen, because they could be seen in the water. Luckily, it was a calm night. That was one saving grace. It wasn't a windy night. And I'm wondering, if this had happened on the other side of the coast with Cyclone Fengal happening. Of course, there wouldn't be a fishing boat out, but I'm just imagining theoretically, if it happened in that kind of weather, this would have been a very, very different story. You had sailors and probably officers jumping into the water to rescue some of those fishermen. There was another fishing boat nearby, apparently, so some of them got rescued. The commanding officer, immediately after the collision, phoned naval headquarters and the base, basically informing them. So the first thing you do is inform. Tell the base what has happened. Collision has taken place, so that all systems are go in case search and rescue needs to be done. In case the submarine is going to be in distress, a helicopter will be put on standby, a maritime patrol aircraft will be put on standby, other rescue equipment will be put on standby. In case something happens to the submarine, that can happen. So it was a naval ship that arrived very shortly after that, because 70 nautical miles off the coast is nothing. Another ship arrived a short while later, and most of the fishermen who were rescued were put onto that ship. And while they were spoken to, they said that there are 13 people and we are only 11. So then the search continued overnight and 2 bodies were fished out. So this is basically the protocol. Once the rescued people are done, a final assessment of the submarine's health was conducted. And then when it was assessed that the submarine is capable of sailing on its own, doesn't need to be towed, doesn't need any special assistance from any other vessel, it immediately sailed to Karwar. Karwar is just south of Goa. It's also a submarine base. And it went there, which is where an initial structural study was conducted, and it said that you've damaged quite a bit. So 10 crore rupees is what it's going to cost. So that's when the officers went to Mumbai and placed their FIR. So very, very immediately, all actions kick into force. The board of inquiry would have started. This same crew will not be sailing this submarine until the board of inquiry is over. The submarine obviously is out of action until it is fixed in all respects. So that's going to put it out of action for, I don't know, a few weeks or months, I'm assuming. The crew itself will need to be available for the board of inquiry. Every member of the crew will be interviewed as part of the board of inquiry, from the commanding officer down to the XO, to the navigation officer, to the chief of the boat, whoever was on the boat. All of them will be interviewed. Their versions will be taken. There will be summary of evidence, and then a decision will be taken on disciplinary action, administrative action, dismissal from service, all those things. I never wish this on anyone, but this is a difficult position for any crew to be in, because I'm repeating over and over again, collisions are a professional stain that is the most unthinkable for any sailor or officer, and therefore it's difficult to sort of wriggle yourself out from under those things. Add to it the fact that 2 fishermen are dead. Like I gave you with the USS Fitzgerald example, by the end of it, we may very, very well be faced with the reality that it was the fishing boat's fault. In fact, from what I'm hearing, it definitely was the fishing boat's fault, from what I'm hearing from my friends in the Navy. But like I said, the Navy does not take that as a mitigating factor in terms of what action it will take against its own personnel. So we can expect real action to be taken here.
Right. A slight tangential question, and some people might laugh at me for asking this, but it's something that honestly really did come up to my head, because that's something I would do if my car was involved in an accident. Does the submarine have insurance? And also the fact
It's a good question.
The fact that you've registered so 2 parts. So one, the insurance bit, because I know, of course, commercial ships do have big insurance, because major things can go wrong out at sea. There have been times when containers have literally fallen into sea, so they need to recover those costs. But these are defense assets you're talking about. Their job involves going into the mouth of danger. So I don't know what insurance company in the world would insure them. So that's part one. Part two is you've registered the FIR at Yellowgate police station that falls under Mumbai police. That police station, I've seen it. It's in Navy Nagar. The Navy obviously will do its own code of inquiry and will have its own proceedings. But who at the end of the day, when it comes to naval vessels versus commercial vessels, who at the end of the day decides the blame? Because if the Navy is doing the inquiry, isn't that conflict of interest? You might say that, I will be very strict with our officers, but you are ultimately investigating your own team for the lapses that they may have done. But the actual accident in question, who determines, this boat was the one at fault? And especially in something like this, when it's a small fishing boat, it's not a major behemoth of a cargo ship that has like a company and lawyers, and they can approach firms, and you can have some sort of international litigation that happens in the Singapore court. This is something that's happened off the coast of India, involves your Navy submarine and one small fishing boat. So who investigates in one case? Those 2 questions.
Very good question. There are two separate investigations that are taking place right now. Let's be very clear. The FIR that has been lodged by the Navy is because the collision took place with a civilian vessel, which was a fishing boat. And the fact that 2 people have died and damage has been sustained by the submarine, which is a public asset. Therefore, it becomes a civilian case. The police will have registered the FIR. If the law take its course in terms of whether the person who owns the fishing boat pursues it legally, it could go to court. And ultimately, courts have jurisdiction on these things. But it gets a little complicated. And the conflict of interest question that you asked is also pertinent, except that the Navy's Board of Inquiry is not empowered to assign blame on the fishing boat here.
Right.
Okay. Let me correct that and fine tune that a little bit more. the Navy's Board of Inquiry is empowered to provide a overall picture as to who was at fault, but it is not empowered to assign damages to anybody else apart from the Navy crew itself. It cannot do that. That's point number one. Point number two, the entire onus of a board of inquiry is to look at only the naval aspects of it. The obviously what happened with the fishing boat, what the fishing boat did, etc., will be part of the testimony that will be brought into the board of inquiry. But ultimately, the entire terms of reference of a board of inquiry is to basically investigate what happened, collect all summary of evidence, probe all details of what may have happened, technical, hearsay, testimony, etc., and then come to a conclusion as to what action needs to be taken. Should no action be taken because nothing could have been done? They are not at fault. Should action be taken in an administrative manner, which is dock pay or loss of seniority, or you can't command a ship again? Many things could be disciplinary action, which is you lose some promotions, you get dismissed from service. There are a whole range of punishments that can take place against officers and sailors in a case like that. So that's the difference between a board of inquiry and a civil suit. So if this continues to court, which it might well do, then a court will decide. The question you asked about insurance is a very interesting one. Now, since military ships are literally instruments of war, they don't have general insurance, okay? Because they literally go into harm's way, carrying enormous amounts of fuel and weapons and bombs and explosives, etc. So no general insurance company is going to say, yes, okay, fine, please pay this premium and we will insure your submarine or your destroyer. It doesn't work like that. However, the reason why it's a good question is because let's take again the example of the INS Karanj, which is a Scorpion class submarine. It's built here in India, in Mumbai, at Mazagon Docks Limited. It's a French submarine where the technology was licensed to India in 2007 as part of a Scorpion deal, and under which India set up a huge submarine production line in Mumbai, at Mazagon Docks, where 6 of these submarines have been built. Under the terms of the license agreement and the production agreement, I'm not aware of the details, but I'm sure that there are certain parts, certain systems, certain technologies in the submarine, maybe even certain structural parts, which carry a warranty, which carry an original equipment manufacturer's warranty, or with a supplier, or with individual companies in India who have supplied those pieces. There may be individual warranties of different kinds. But if you're asking about, whether there's someone can go to Oriental Bank of Commerce and say, I've banged my Alto into an auto, and please give me my $16,000. It doesn't work like that.
Right, cool. Two final, again, sort of tangential questions on this topic. One is, while researching for this, I was looking at the Google map of the Mumbai port, and I think we've once discussed this previously as well, that's a very congested area to operate in. You have the main port itself, where you have cargo ships coming in and unloading their stock, and you have the naval piers and port quite close by, where you have all the naval ships parked and stationed. It's quite a tough area, obviously, to kind of get out and get in. So does the Navy, like most commercial ports, have like this specialized group of people known as pilots, harbor pilots, who know that area very, very well, so they are able to guide and help all the commercial ships coming in, because their captains and their officers and their crew might not be so aware of the layout of that particular port, right? Does the Navy also have a subset of the specialized group of people who can jump on board a naval ship when it's kind of entering the Mumbai harbor? Or is it that because the same sort of crew usually operates out of that place, they don't need that extra skill? No.
So absolutely, very much the same. The Navy also has harbor pilots, for its larger ships, even for its smaller ships. And the reason for that is not just to be sure about compliance with the shipping lanes and the approach areas, etc., but also because of the reason that we began this episode with, because most collisions most accidents, etc., happen in harbor approach areas, which is where the maximum congestion of shipping traffic actually is. And you've seen Mumbai. If you look at a picture of Mumbai on Google Maps, not only do you see all those ships, but you can see that vast dotted landscape of fishing boats. There are so many fishing boats there as well. Post 2611, more technologies have been introduced. The automatic identification system has been made mandatory for all boats over 300 tons, etc. But it's still a huge challenge for Navy ships. So they still do have pilots. They have, sometimes there are tugboats. There are harbor pilot boats which help navigate in those very, very small approach channels. And even while leaving, many ships sometimes leave at once, and there can be navigational errors, there can be blind spots and things like that. So absolutely, the Navy has its own harbor pilots.
Yeah, right. Final point. Again, complete tangential, but the reason I'm asking is because I thought of it while just like making notes for this. Is the point that this submarine now will be in a dockyard for maybe several months now, taking repairs? Because again, once we've discussed previously how naval assets take lots of time to repair, overhaul, and stuff like that. And this is more for, my interest, because I want to know what's life like in the Indian Navy. So what's it like in terms of crew allotment to ships? From my background of watching mostly, Hollywood movies of wars and, naval warfare and stuff like that, the sort of picture I have is that you mota have the same crew that's given this one ship or one submarine, and then you'll have some officers sort of rotating once in a while. You'll have a new officer coming in for a few years, and then he'll go or she'll go to some other ship or submarine. But the sailor base usually will be more or less the same. Is it the same in the Indian Navy? And what happens at times of unscheduled repairs? So in this case, you've given us one scenario where this entire crew will be on ground and they'll have to be available for the board of inquiry. But assuming their names are cleared, most of their names will be cleared, and they are set, but their submarines in repair. So what do they do then? What's life like for them?
There are loads of administrative tasks and posts that the Navy has for people who are on shore until their ship gets ready. Good example is an aircraft carrier, which takes years and years to build, but it already has a crew. Yeah. So what is that crew doing while the ship is being built? They're very much there watching over what's happening with the ship. In the case of the INS Karanj, it's a little bit more complicated, because in this case, the crew will not be operating the submarine. That's because the submarine will be in dry dock being fixed. May not even be in dry dock. We don't know that. The damage may be quite superficial, in which case it doesn't need to be dry docked even, and it can be fixed while it's still in the water. But depending on what kind of board of inquiry, the course that the board of inquiry takes, the crew might either never get to be in the INS Karanj again, or might be cleared and go on to a different submarine, might take on some administrative posts, etc. I don't want to second guess what happens to the commanding officer and stuff, because it's sad to think about that, because nobody wants to be in this kind of situation. But it is not at all uncommon for ships to be in refit or to be under maintenance, etc. And the crew is either involved in the maintenance exercise because they've got to still keep, it's tempting to think of a ship as just a shell just sitting there being maintained. But even when a ship is being maintained, it's switched on. Systems are on. You still have to keep it worked up and ready to sail out. It's not like it's, sab kuch band kar do, maintain karo ab. It's not like that. The ship is still very much humming and alive, and its motors are on. Its systems need to be worked up so that, once everything is done, it can sail back and be active. In the case of the INS Karanj, let's take a kind of best case scenario. If in the very, very remote likelihood, very, very remote, almost impossible, very remote likelihood that no punishments are handed down to anybody in the crew and they get to go back to their submarine. All they have to do is wait in Karwar. They'll be with the submarine. The crew is 60, 70 people. That's it. With the submarine while it is fixed, and then immediately take it back out to sea. And remember that after a submarine is fixed, it will spend a week or two working back up, because all those structural changes, the damage, the repairs, etc., will once again have to be checked at sea to make sure that everything's fine, and then it becomes works itself up to be operational once again. So these pauses in your career away from the ship that you're operating is not uncommon at all. There are many, many different tasks that can be filled by such crews.
Yeah. So that's life in the Navy for you, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. We'll end it there. Thanks, Shiv. Fascinating insights. Loved this conversation. And I think we ended up doing what we set out to, which is sort of, kind of not focus on the collision per se, but talk more about what really happens and why that really happens in the first place. And I hope our listeners and viewers, I keep seeing readers, muscle memory, so many years of, just doing desk work.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Text work. So I hope our listeners and viewers had a great time as well. Thanks, Shiv, once again. Thanks as always to our producer, Hannah Priyadarshini, and thanks to all our listeners and viewers. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries with your passport. Bye-bye.